I want to talk about a very interesting aspect of the affirmative action ruling by the Supreme Court, a fantastic ruling essentially obliterating racial and ethnic preferences in higher education with possible reverberations even into the workforce and all kinds of other race-intoxicated programs that we have in this country today. But the aspect I want to talk about was discussed both by Justice Thomas and by Justice Sotomayor. It's called the mismatch theory, the mismatch theory. Now, Thomas, in writing about the mismatch theory, treats it as quite obviously true. And Sotomayor, in talking about the mismatch theory, treats it as discredited, somehow debunked, to use the fashionable phrase. But I want to talk about what this mismatch theory is and whether Thomas is right or whether Sotomayor is right. So the mismatch theory says something like this. Let's assume that I am a young black student who has a B average in high school, and in the SAT, the Scholastic Assessment test, I'm in the 70th percentile. So I'm an above average student, but I'm not an outstanding student. I'm not a great student. And so I apply to a bunch of colleges. Now, normally, based upon my academic strength and academic preparation, I should get into a mid-level college where I would be competitively matched against my peers and I would do reasonably well. Why? Because I do have the academic preparation to be able to succeed at that level. But what happens is because of affirmative action, you have a college like MIT or Caltech or Berkeley, which turns away some white or Asian American student that has vastly better grades and vastly better test scores, but because they want to meet a diversity roster, they want more black students, they go, let's take this guy. Yeah, he's not that good, but the point is they're taking somebody who is now competitively mismatched. And the point I want to stress is that we're not talking about a bad student. We're talking about an average student who, by and large, should go to an average school. But by going to a school like MIT or Caltech, it's almost like taking a 9th grader who's perfectly fine for the 9th grade, but then sticking him or her into the 12th grade, where suddenly you're up against students who are much stronger, who have learned more, who are at a much more advanced starting point. So what happens is you then realize your academic inferiority, you start feeling demoralized, you start doing poorly in class, not just because you're feeling bad, but because you don't actually have the preparation. You haven't taken the advanced algebra. You haven't taken introductory calculus. Your preparation is inadequate for the situation in which you find yourself. And so what happens? You do poorly, you drop out. If you're in law school, you fail the bar exam. This is the mismatch theory. So you can see it makes a certain kind of obvious sense. And it makes an obvious sense because affirmative action does not involve taking students who are slightly worse. Like you got two guys, hey, they're pretty much the same. One guy is just a nose ahead of the other guy. It's not like that. It's like taking somebody who is markedly behind cognitively, sometimes a year, 2 years, even 3 or 4 years behind academically, and sticking them with students who are much stronger than they are. Some years ago, in fact, almost 20 years ago now, I guess in the early 2000s, a law professor named Richard Sander published an article in the Stanford Law Review, which caused a kind of shock, because what he did is he took this mismatch theory and he brought a whole wealth of empirical data to bear on it. Now, he was focusing not on undergraduate college, but focusing on law schools. And what he was talking about is, again, the fact that, look, it is true that if you make the standards more lenient for, say, blacks, you're going to have more blacks, let's say, at Berkeley Law School. But the question, says Sanders, is not a simple matter of do you have more blacks at law school? Sure, the law school is happy. They're grinning like Cheshire cats. Hey, look at all the blacks we got over here. But, says Sanders, are these blacks actually going to stay in Berkeley Law School, or is a bunch of them going to drop out? You got to look at the dropout rate, because after all, those are people. Think about it. It's not just that those are people who could have succeeded at another law school. And so what you've done is they're worse off. You're taking a black kid who could have have done really well. Let's just say at George Washington Law School or Tulane Law School, you've put them into Berkeley Law School, now they drop out and they don't even take the bar, or they don't drop out and then they fail the bar, so they don't make it to being a lawyer. And Sanders' point is if you're trying to measure success, at least in terms of blacks, you got to look at how many lawyers are produced at the end of the game, not simply how many blacks show up in freshman year as first-year law school students at Berkeley Law School. Now, admittedly, there are some students who will get a preference. They realize that they're far behind. They work extra hard. They catch up and they do well. So it's not that the mismatch applies to every student. There are some students who get affirmative action, take advantage of those opportunities and thrive. But the point is there are a lot of other students, and perhaps the majority, who find themselves in a competitively mismatched situation. They would have been better off, if you will, going to a school for which they were fully qualified and for which they had the proper academic preparation.